And to see his grandkids a part of that, I know would have been something he would have been unbelievably proud of.
Today, Mark Becker is housed at the Iowa Medical and Classification Center, a medium security correctional facility. According to Mark's family, he is remorseful and finally getting the treatment he needs. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
Grace Ann Sparks died at the age of just 19. It was extremely tragic. Grace shot herself with a .357 revolver. But this was not a simple, sad suicide. There was much more to the story. Grace was communicating with a man named Hayden Berkebile. Hayden and Grace knew each other for years, and despite being married to other people, they continued to stay in contact. On the day Grace died, she and Hayden were sending Facebook messages back and forth, and prosecutors say Hayden coerced Grace into a game of Russian roulette. Tonight, we take a closer look at what happened. We'll hear from her mom and our own experts to try to understand how and why Grace fired the gun. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And this story is extremely sad, extremely tragic, but important. Really important. Some serious issues and some things that we are seeing going on, whether it's through social media or other places. Got to talk about it tonight. So we're going to bring in our experts, but first I want you to hear the whole story. Joy Lim Nakrin, Court TV legal correspondent, has the story of Grace Ann Sparks.
A disturbing relationship ending in death. But did the actions amount to a crime? Prosecutors claim 29-year-old Hayden Jennings Berkebile drove 19-year-old Grace Ann Sparks to take her own life.
We're going to ask that you find the defendant guilty of criminally negligent homicide for his criminally negligent conduct that resulted in Grace Ann Sparks' death, and also for filing a false report.
The pair engaged in an intense, long-distance relationship, largely online. Their documented Facebook messages paint a troubling picture of their interactions, including suicide games, during which Sparks ultimately died.
You're going to see that the practice of engaging in these suicide games was something that took place during the course of this very short relationship, intense relationship from July to September 2019. And what effect that had on the defendant when the victim used a gun to play suicide edge games for his sexual gratification.
Prosecutors say Berkebile coerced and controlled Sparks, driving her to perform demeaning and dangerous acts, including loading a bullet into a revolver to play Russian roulette and firing the bullet which ultimately killed her.
We submit to you that the proof will show that Ms. Sparks was looking for love. And the defendant in this case was looking to destruct a life and to watch a life be taken in front of him.
The state has 1,300 messages, which they say prove their case, including these troubling texts from Berkebile stating, "I'll piss on you, slut. Tell your brain to expletive and listen to what I tell it instead of making expletive up. Lucifer's got you. I want to kill you."
I want to kill you on August 30th. Victim responds, "Why?" Defendant, "I don't know, I'm so grr." Victim says, "Please try to put into words, I want to understand." Defendant says, "I don't have words." Defendant says, "I just need." Victim says, "What are you doing at the moment?" Defendant says, "In the bathroom masturbating."
The defense claims this disturbing language was part of a role play between two damaged people playing pretend.
They engaged in this type of role play, not because he just wanted to. Proof is going to show she wanted as well. Proof is going to show that they had perhaps foolishly, engaged in this lifestyle because they thought that it would mitigate their feelings from what happened. They thought it would provide release. They had tried therapy and it didn't work. And they thought this would work.
The defense says the victim survived most of the games by design.
Here you see time and time again they engage in suicide role play. She doesn't die.
And they claim her own depression led her to take it too far.
See, the proof shows there's a few damage. Doing what damage people do. Messing up, going about things the wrong way. But ultimately with good intentions.
I want to bring in Court TV legal correspondent Joy Lim Nakrin, who spoke exclusively to the mom, to Grace's mom. But before we get to Grace's mom, I want to understand a little bit more, Joy, about Grace Ann Sparks and this relationship, how it began, why it began, and what was there anything more to it than these messages back and forth?
Yeah, so Grace Ann Sparks apparently had connected with Hayden Berkebile as early as 11 years old, according to her mother, 13 years old, according to the defense side. It's still not exactly clear, but by most accounts, there was some sort of relationship wherein Berkebile was grooming this victim in some way. That's what her mother describes it as grooming, and her mother also believes that Berkebile not just groomed her daughter for this kind of sexual exploitation that ultimately led to her death, but also kind of groomed her to keep it quiet, to hide it from her family. And in fact, Candace Sparks was really stunned to learn some of the details for the very first time in court through that testimony and the graphic images that she saw of her own daughter. Let's listen.
She said she was suffering a lot. Did you have any idea she was suffering?
No. I mean, she had anxiety, so we knew that there was a little anxiety going on. She was talking about feeling depressed, and she had gone and gotten some help with that, was on medication, was even doing some therapy. I mean, it wasn't surprising because depression kind of runs in our family, so we knew what to do. You know, get some help, get on the right medication, enjoy your activity, you know, all the things that you do healthy when you're trying to battle depression. But I had no idea the extent of what she was going through. I mean, she was happy, we thought. She was making plans for the future. She had her horse, and she never let on that this was going on underneath. The trial was very traumatic. It was, well, first of all, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what this man did to my child. I learned a lot about what she went through, and it was very difficult to watch because she was twisting in the wind, it felt like, you know, with the way he just would ramp up and then take down and ramp up her suicidal ideation. And it's almost as if he wanted to encourage that. So sitting there, listening to that was hard. It broke my heart. It literally broke my heart. My baby was suffering. She was suffering a lot. And she didn't tell anybody. And so hearing that and knowing what she went through, it was difficult. It was very difficult.
Incredibly difficult, you can imagine, Vinnie, not just to learn that her daughter had died at the young age of 19, but to learn it was by suicide, and then to learn about this man, Hayden Berkebile, who she'd never even heard of until after her daughter's death, and then to see kind of the details come out in court, see those graphic images, along with the whole world. But it's something that Candace Sparks felt that she needed to be part of. She felt that she needed to be there throughout the course of this trial, and she continues to be a voice for her daughter.
Some of these numbers we're talking about, because he's 29, right? And she was 19. There's like 10 years difference here, and this starts when she's 11 or 13. Either one is horrific. I mean, he's in his 20s, speaking to a little girl for all these years. This is not normal behavior. This is not right. So, what do we know? Did they ever meet each other? Was this all done online? Were there times when they actually met one another? What can you tell us about this relationship and the history that led up to this incredibly tragic moment?
Yeah, incredibly tragic moment. So it was described as really an on-again, off-again relationship over the course of several years, but it was the last few months when it became particularly intense, and still it remained largely online. And they initially did meet through kind of an online chat room, I guess you could describe it as, where kind of strangers could get to know one another, but they did ultimately meet in person one time a few months before Grace Ann Sparks was ultimately killed, and apparently there was some sort of sexual interaction there, but it was a largely online relationship. And due to that fact, I mean, that's really where the evidence is coming from. That's where this body of evidence is coming from that has allowed prosecutors to go forth with this case. All of the tracking on Facebook Messenger, the messages shared between them as well, and the records of the video calls, Vinny.
Okay, let's talk about Berkebile. What's going on in his life? I mean, what is his world like if he's spending time online for years with a child? With a child. I mean, he's an adult, she's a child, and then she finally gets to the age of adulthood and has known him for years now, I guess, apparently. What do we know about his background, his situation, his life?
Yeah, so I mean, up until this particular incident, had a fairly clean record. In fact, you know, when we look at the sentencing and the range for a crime like this, it's up to 6 years here in the state of Tennessee, but apparently because there isn't a prior record, the maximum in Berkebile's case is 2 years. But, you know, as we stated from the outset, he was in a relationship. At the same time, the victim was in a relationship and was living with a boyfriend who actually testified at the court during the course of this trial. So it's really complicated. And, you know, again, Candace Sparks, the mother of this victim who I spent a lot of time with yesterday, she had not even heard of Hayden Berkebile until after her daughter died.
I think that speaks volumes about the nature of this relationship. If you're not, you know, if it's a real relationship, you share with your loved ones, with your parents, friends, whoever, but like a mystery guy that is just manipulating a little girl for years until she turns into an adult, but a young adult at that. So how is Grace Ann's mom doing? I mean, moving forward here, I can't imagine, well, first of all, I can't imagine the loss that she suffered, number one. Then going through with this trial and learning all this other information. How is she doing moving forward now?
You know, I am just so impressed with her strength and her courage. She's clearly very emotional still, some 2 years after her daughter passed away, but she's been so brave in speaking out. In fact, she's made it a point to speak out because she's hoping to educate others about what happened to her daughter in hopes that it might save others from suffering the same fate. You know, she's calling for specific legislation around coerced suicide because, Vinny, as we know, this particular case is being prosecuted under the criminally negligent homicide, and kind of the general body of law there. And it's something that up until this particular case here in Tennessee is really centered around actions, not words. And so, you know, Ms. Sparks is working with prosecutors in this case to get specific legislation surrounding words, so surrounding the coercion of suicide. She's also speaking out about suicide prevention, suicide awareness, cyberbullying, and she talked a little bit about suicide, something that, you know, is often left unspoken when she was talking about this beautiful charm bracelet that she wore in memory of Grace. Let's listen.
This beautiful bracelet you wore today.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I call it my Gracie bracelet. It has a horse on it because she loved horses. It has a semicolon. The semicolon is a symbol for kind of suicide prevention, suicide awareness. It indicates that the idea, when you use a semicolon in a sentence, it's not a full stop. It's kind of a pause. It's not the equivalent of a period, but almost the equivalent of a period. So it's a pause for an additional information to come next, additional relevant information. So the semicolon represents that one story is not over yet. My story is not over yet. This is my favorite. It's a purple Chuck Taylor. She used to wear Chuck Taylors all the time, purple ones.
So you see that smile on her face as she recalls her daughter, and it's amazing. She still finds light in those moments, in those memories about her daughter. And you know, she's an incredibly spiritual person, and she said she believes that, you know, her daughter is at peace now and is no longer suffering. And she's the one who's suffering, but that's what loved ones do for one another, is they carry the burden for their family members. And she believes that she's going to be reunited with Grace Ann someday, and that Grace is waiting for her, and that part of her purpose on this earth right now, which she considers just a temporary experience, is to make an impact, to raise awareness, and to save other families from suffering the same fate.
Absolutely. Our thoughts are with her. She's incredibly strong, incredibly brave, and I'm so glad that she's speaking out, because that voice needs to be heard. Joy Lim Nakrin, thank you so much for joining us tonight, reporting there in Tennessee, Court TV legal correspondent. We'll speak again really soon. When we come back, folks, we're going to bring in our psychological experts to kind of tackle this whole, there's a lot of things we need to tackle tonight. Also, coming up next hour. In Venice, Florida, it was the most searched story of 2021, the tragic tale of Gabby Petito and her killer boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. Brian murdered Gabby and then left her body in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. Brian then drove home to Florida to his parents' home in Gabby's van. When he got there, Brian and his parents went silent, saying nothing. Now, the Laundries are being sued by Gabby's parents for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We have the latest.
I'm asking for help from the parents of Brian, and I'm asking for help of the family members and friends of the Laundrie family as well. You know, there is a tip line that you can call anonymously. Whatever you can do to make sure my daughter comes home, I'm asking for that help.
Escape.com today.
Hey, are you still up? I had a bad dream. I had a dream about you. I'm kind of freaked out some.
I'm okay.
Okay, I love you. I'm sorry.
You okay?
No.
What's wrong?
Everything. I'm having a panic attack. It's fine. Not your problem.
How can I help?
You're not gonna leave me, right? Like, you don't want anyone? You're not gonna just end me and clear the way to add someone else?
Never. I'm not going anywhere.
Okay. I guess I'm worried you're still mad at me about the pics and stuff.
No, I was never mad or upset.
Okay.
There are like 1,200 of these messages back and forth. And I mean, just think about the nature of this relationship going back to when this young woman was not a young woman. She was a child, 11 or 13 years old, when this adult man, 10 years older than her, starts this whole thing. What is that? To me, that's the beginning of the problem, obviously, right? But whatever damage you want to allege in this case started then. Absolutely started then. At least that's my opinion, because it's just not healthy. I mean, Grace Ann Sparks, 11, 13 years old, this man with this, strange sort of way about him and what he wants to talk about and do and everything is just grooming and molding her. She was a child. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. Let's bring in our experts. Joining me in Los Angeles, California, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and associate professor at Pepperdine University, Dr. Judy Ho. Also in Los Angeles, forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Praveen Kambam. And in New York City, psychotherapist, host of Talking Live on Facebook Watch and the Bite Side podcast, Dr. Robbie Ludwig is with us. Thank you all for being here. I won't say doctor. Well, I've got to say doctor because everybody's a doctor. But usually, I can just say doctor. Now I got to say Dr. Judy Ho. Let me ask you. To me, how damaging is it if you've got, someone who's 10 years older than an 11-year-old or 13-year-old child who begins this whole thing rolling? I mean, to me, that's where it all started. That's where the damage came for Grace. That's how she becomes damaged. It's because of him and what he's doing.
That's right, Vinny. They started communications when she was only 13 and he was 21 years old. And so that's a time when people are searching for who they are. They're developing their identity. And at the same time, they're still very susceptible to outside influences, especially people that they think they look up to. So here's this older gentleman, or so we thought, somebody that she thought she could get love from attention, maybe heal from the wounds of her trauma, because it sounds like she had gone through some abusive or traumatic experiences already in her life at that point. And he really took advantage of that. So essentially there's this long grooming period where she would do anything that he asked just to get his affection. And it was just such a vulnerable time in her young life that anybody who came in would exert this type of influence. And he really abused the power that he had over this young woman.
Yeah, it's that, Dr. Praveen Kambam, to me, the nature of the relationship from the beginning was just off, unhealthy, and she didn't have a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment about this case specifically, but these type of cases, what you're looking at is, does someone have power over the other person? And if so, are they pressuring the other person to do something? That's really the key distinction between something that maybe is BDSM play versus a coerced suicide. Typically with BDSM play, you're going to see some aspect of consent, right? And so you need at least an age of majority for that legally, but let's say you are an adult, there's typically a consent component there. Versus coerced suicide, maybe it's intentional or there's a choice some people may believe out in the audience, but when we look at it from mental health, we're looking at, is the emotional state, is the external factors, are those things influencing, are they altering the decision-making related to the suicide or the act?
This child, Dr. Robbie, did not have a chance. This child had no chance, not at age 13. Come on, that is young. That is
No,
super
and
young.
It's true. And it sounds like this man was a complete predator, that he was looking for somebody who was vulnerable to him, someone that he could have power over, and that there was sadism there, that he was sadistic in part of his intentions. And we see this in abusive relationships, but there's a grooming there because she was a young child. So this is a very disturbed man that Grace found herself with. And she became very dependent on him in terms of her self-esteem, her lovability. And we see that in terms of the clip that you played when she feared that he would leave her. So she had no intention of leaving him and felt that connection with him made her lovable and whole, at least at times.
You know, it's difficult enough being a child and growing up and all the issues the kids have to deal with. And she has problems in her life already. But he then jumps in, Dr. Judy, and now is controlling her. And to me, if you turn around and you try to blame her and say she's broken, well guess who broke her? Right? It's not. Right. These aren't two consenting adults coming together. You have to look at the entire length of the relationship, I think, to really understand and have some perspective on how this happened.
That's right, Vinny. This was not a dynamic that occurred overnight. This is a dynamic that happened over many, many years, where essentially he obtained her trust. Many of these texts actually referenced that she said, "I still trust you," even as he was telling her to do more degrading and more dangerous things. And Dr. Praveen talked about the issue of actual consent. There wasn't really real consent here because for so much of their relationship, she wasn't of age. But even when she became of age, she was always still that young child. That mentality of that young person who was vulnerable and scared and just looking for love was always there. That element of their relationship was the through line. And for him to try to blame her and say, oh, yes, she was suicidal, but really we were both suicidal. We were both just wounded people trying to help each other. That is just not responsible because he could be disturbed, and I'm sorry if he also has his own mental health struggles, but he has to take responsibility for what happened here. And he is absolutely in that one-up position just by virtue of his age and the respect and admiration she clearly had for him throughout their relationship by looking at these text messages.
Okay, our doctors are in the house. They will stay with us. When we return, we'll hear from Berkebile. Hayden Berkebile, the defendant, the one who just controlled a child until she became an adult and then coerced her to take her own life. Don't go away.
That's the choice. Did you tell me that? One of my best friends, man. I share everything. Talk every day. What do you think? Lord.
All right, I'm so glad everyone is seeing the interrogation video so you can see what it really looks like and who he really was, right? Instead of the little show that people put on when it's time to go to court, you know, and it's time to be on trial and be a criminal defendant. Can't even recognize the person, right? But that's what he really looks like. Hayden Berkebile. Still with us, Dr. Judy Ho, Dr. Praveen Kambaum, and Dr. Robbie Ludwig. Dr. Praveen, let me ask you about the nature of this relationship, or any relationship, being online versus in person. You know, we're in a strange place in society now, and it seems like people in general can be maybe even more greatly impacted by the bombardment of whatever's coming through your device in these conversations. And people may say things and do things that they might not do face to face.
Yeah, great question. So I think there's always been these type of relationships where there's this power differential and it's unhealthy, but social media, the internet, has made it so much more accessible. You're essentially opened up to the whole world, essentially, for these types of relationships. And so that can happen much more often. The second thing is that when we're online, we can actually act differently than we might face to face. There's that barrier that's reduced there. And sometimes that's innocent and it doesn't really cause any types of issues, but then you have to sort out who's potentially a predator and who's not. And the last aspect is that we've seen with adolescents more and more of this suicide and self-harm play online. And I think a key thing to remember for your viewers is that play is not necessarily exclusive with somebody actually being suicidal in real life. And as professionals, we take that very seriously.
Absolutely. Dr. Robbie, I want you to take a look here of Berkebile in his interview here. There's a couple things that he says that I want to ask you about.
She started getting extreme and like saying she didn't want to do this anymore and I begged her not to. Basically, I was trying to talk her down and she said it didn't matter anymore. She was never going to be able to see me. She was never going to be able to have me or Jim. No one is ever going to love her. And then I saw her grab a bullet and I told her to do it. And she moved the camera and I heard a gunshot and that's when I told you guys.
Couple things here. One, she started getting extreme, right? Pointing the finger right at her, and then saying, I told her not to do it. But it seems the nature of this relationship, he was the dominant one, and this is the moment she chooses not to listen to him?
Yeah, no, I think this man, Hayden, was playing games for a long time. So he groomed her. It was like an emotional rape and then murder. So what he did with her, he played with her mind and said, you're lovable, you're not lovable. This girl really felt she had to do everything she could in order to be loved by this man, even if it meant killing herself. And I do believe Hayden knew exactly what he was doing because that's what gave him pleasure, knowing that he can control somebody and how she interacts with life was the joy and the high for him. The fact that she killed herself, you know, I don't even know if he's even emotionally connected. Look how blunted he is in his emotional expression and reaction. I don't know how connected he is to anyone. It just seems like he enjoys the game of inflicting pain, and he would have moved on to somebody else because in his mind, if somebody suicides, they have agency over their own life. And we know that's not exactly the entire case.
Let's listen to more now of Hayden Berkebile being interviewed by police.
What was going on in your head that day, Hayden? Because there was something She wanted to play. You asked her numbers. You knew what her numbers were. She was willing to play, use her sack, do whatever for you. No, you wanted to end your words. I want to for you. I want to end you. There was something else going on with you that way. You didn't want to play. You wanted to
So Dr. Judy Ho, on the one hand, he's being interrogated now by police. I didn't want her to die. I didn't want her to die. And it completely contradicts all of the communication that police have right in front of them. I mean, this is a guy who now is realizing, I think, what he has done.
Absolutely, Vinny. I don't think that this was planned out in the way that sometimes you see these people who they literally are going over the details of what they're going to do, take someone's life. They might even revel in that. I think this is a person now during this interrogation is losing it. He's saying, I had no idea you had all that information. Maybe he didn't even really think about how he was going to approach this interview. And yet the investigator is saying, we have all of this on you. You said these words to her, and you know that she listens to what you say. She does what you tell her. That is the relationship dynamic you guys have. And I think here he's just recognizing that it's all coming down and he really can't run away from it and make any excuses. Whatever mindset he was in that day, he said those words and he encouraged her to take her life. Even in that moment, if he thought she probably won't do it, he knows what he was doing. And he was saying these words. It does not appear that he didn't know right from wrong. That was never part of what was discussed in this case. He knows right from wrong, and he still repeatedly told her to take her life. Eventually, what was she going to do, especially because of this dynamic that we've been talking about throughout the show, that this was 8 years plus in the making where he was in that power position, and this is how she thought she could earn his love.
Dr. Judy Ho, Dr. Praveen Kambaum, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, thank you so much. I know your time is valuable. We appreciate it. We got much more straight ahead, plus coming up next hour. In Oakland County, Michigan, the Oxford school shooter took the lives of 4 classmates. Now, parents are suing the school, not for money, but to do something to make the school safe.
Putting our children's names in a federal lawsuit is a desperate attempt. It's a desperate attempt to be heard.
text free.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at this whole legal issue of coerced suicide. Joy Lim Nakrin has more for us.
Sticks and stones can break one's bones, and words can hurt or even kill. It's a controversial legal tenet leading to increasingly more criminal prosecution, explains Tennessee-based criminal defense attorney Gregory Isaacs.
Our right to free speech is a fundamental right guaranteed to each of us by the Constitution, but it's not an absolute right. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. There's limits on pornography, etc. Hate speech is outlawed by a variety of statutes.
In Tennessee versus Hayden Berkebile, the defendant is accused of using words to ultimately drive his victim to death. He never physically harmed 19-year-old Grace Ann Sparks, but prosecutors say his words alone eventually killed her.
What is the basis to actually charge this man with a crime?
This case really was prosecuted, even though it's novel. When you see someone prosecuted for words, inducing suicide, whatever, it was a very basic criminal statute under Tennessee law, and that is criminally negligent homicide.
Prosecutors say Berkebile demeaned and dominated his victim, preying on her depression. It started with a series of sexually charged suicide games, which ended with Sparks taking her own life. And they argue, even though it was just words, it amounts to criminally negligent homicide.
And under Tennessee law, that is a crime where you intentionally engage in reckless conduct, and that it's foreseeable that the conduct would result in serious bodily injury or death. In this case, it happened to be online Russian roulette with somebody that was mentally ill and suffering from suicidal ideation. It could be driving your car 110 miles an hour through a school zone, water skiing through a crowded lake on the 4th of July with the boat wide open. It's simply reckless conduct that could foreseeably result in injury.
Another high-profile coerced suicide case captured national attention when in 2017, a Massachusetts court convicted Michelle Carter of coercing her 18-year-old boyfriend, Conrad Roy, to take his own life. Similar to Berkebile, she sent him a series of chilling messages, now the subject of the HBO documentary, I Love You, Now Die.
When Michelle Carter was charged with manslaughter in the death of Conrad Roy, there was a lot of controversy in Massachusetts about whether what she had done amounted to a crime. Everyone thought she was a horrible person, did something terrible, but did she commit a crime? Because we hadn't had a case where words alone had been the evidence.
That's New England School of Law professor Wendy Murphy, who closely followed and taught the case.
So with the Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy case, that really changed this whole body of law. What was the impact?
It did change the legal landscape in the sense that we now have clarity about how social media and language used in social media can lead to a criminal prosecution for manslaughter.
Legal experts agree it's an area of law which will likely develop for years to come.
Again, I think the technology is at the heart of it because, if you do the proverbial tell someone to jump off a bridge, I think if 20 years ago someone had jumped off the bridge, no one would even think about prosecuting the person for criminally negligent homicide. But these cases are much deeper. I could see a number of legislatures enacting legislation that specifically target and outlaw inducing suicide, etc.
I'm a free speech guy. Generally, you should be able to say whatever you want in this country, but, here you're being prosecuted for words. This is a different scenario, and we're dealing with it a lot more now. Let's bring in some experts. Joining me now, Nashville, Tennessee, criminal defense attorney Jack Bird, and in Chattanooga, Tennessee, criminal defense attorney Robin Flores. Great to have you both here. Thanks so much for joining us. Jack, let me start with you. Are you at all concerned about criminal prosecutions for words, based on words here?
Not when you look at the facts of this case. You know, the statute requires that there's a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the victim can be killed. I think the proof sets this out in this case, exactly what happened. This gentleman took advantage of a young lady that had suicidal ideations and encouraged her to even take a weapon and kill herself. So in this case, no. Could it fall to the point where someone just makes an offhand comment and then someone does something? Yeah, that's a concern.
Robin, your thoughts, because again, this is kind of getting in a new area here. We're seeing more of this, especially because of social media, the bullying and everything else that's going on. Your thoughts?
Well, I think this is going to be a situation that's going to be an issue first impression for our appellate courts. I would imagine that defense counsel would be appealing this. The issue, I think, here is the duty that he may have had that developed over a period of time. You know, the statute's very simple. It's basically, you know, just two subparts that are about a sentence or so apiece. And the case law that is really what drives or defines what the elements are. I mean, the case law goes from gross negligence to reckless conduct. And the party would have to know or should have known that what they were doing could lead to that result. Maybe not that specific result, but in this case of death. And as I understand from the fact pattern, that this was a relationship over a long period of time, which could turn the tables as far as words being protected. Here would be words that weren't protected because they were actually the mechanism that drove this person to death.
Jack, do you think our criminal justice system, whether it's in Tennessee or any other state, should think about enacting something much more specific when it comes to what we're talking about here, which is coerced suicide?
I believe it should. I believe that the homicide statutes don't speak well enough on this very issue, and that there should be some type of legislation enacted that can address this very type thing. You see this consistently now, where people are, just getting online and convincing people to do things that they shouldn't. There was another case here in Tennessee where a young man took his life based upon the same type of stuff once it was brought out that he was gay, and he ended up killing himself. Not necessarily that those individuals tried to get him to kill himself, such as in this case, but it's something that does need to be more defined so that it's more controllable when prosecutors do wish to charge somebody with this crime.
All right, we're out of time, guys, but Jack Bird, Robin Flores, appreciate you jumping in tonight. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Yes, sir, my pleasure.
Thank you.
You know, this case has many disturbing elements, including suicide. If you or someone you know is struggling, there is help available. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24/7. The number is on the screen, 1-800-273-TALK.
Fabletics.com.
In Venice, Florida, it was the most searched story of 2021, the tragic tale of Gabby Petito and her killer boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. Brian murdered Gabby and then left her body in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. Brian then drove home to Florida to his parents' home in Gabby's van. When he got there, Brian and his parents went silent, saying nothing. Now, the Laundries are being sued by Gabby's parents for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We have the latest.
I'm asking for help from the parents of Brian, and I'm asking for help of the family members and friends of the Laundrie family as well. You know, there is a tip line that you can call anonymously. Whatever you can do to make sure my daughter comes home, I'm asking for that help.
In Oakland County, Michigan, the Oxford school shooter took the lives of 4 classmates. Now, parents are suing the school, not for money, but to do something to make the school safe.
Putting our children's names in a federal lawsuit is a desperate attempt. It's a desperate attempt to be heard.
In Las Vegas, Nevada, the Playboy model murder trial, Kelsey Turner accused of murdering her sugar daddy, Dr. Thomas Burchard. We have a preview of this upcoming trial. Plus, a raucous bunch of teens break into an $8 million home for a party and boxing matches, and the sheriff is asking everyone to turn themselves in. Tonight's 13th juror question: if your child was there, would you tell him or her to turn themselves in? Be honest. Get ready. This hour of closing arguments starts right now. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thanks so much for joining us here on Closing Arguments. Back in 2021, the most searched story was the story of Gabby Petito. It was a story that captivated the nation for many reasons. And the first reason is Gabby Petito was living her life online. And she was off on this adventure. She thought it was like an incredible adventure with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. Turned out to be the worst, worst choice ever to be with this guy. He's a killer. He's a murderer. Took her life. How and why? We'll never get the answer, because Laundrie took his own life as well. But at the time that Brian Laundrie came back from this trip, he came back alone. Now, he left from his home in Florida with Gabby, and then came back without Gabby, but with her van, and was then with his parents. And at some point, Gabby's parents realized that she was missing and was not accounted for. They hadn't heard from her. But they knew about the trip, obviously. This amazing trip she was going to take, and what's going on. And the Petitos just wanted a little help in finding their daughter, help that never came. Because the Laundries, whether it's Brian Laundrie, the killer, before he killed himself, said nothing. And his parents said nothing. Not a little call. Hey, listen, Brian just came back without Gabby. We don't know what happened with Gabby, but you should be looking for her. No, just complete silence, not returning their calls. So now, the Petito family, her parents, are suing Brian's parents, the Laundries. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. That is the cause of action. Let me read for you part of this lawsuit. Christopher Laundrie and Roberta Laundrie knew of the mental suffering and anguish of Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, and they knew that they could alleviate, at least in part, such mental suffering and anguish by disclosing what they knew about the well-being and the location of the remains of Gabby Petito, yet they repeatedly refused to do so. As part of the allegations here, they were just silent, saying, could you imagine doing, I don't know if anyone can imagine doing that. She was living in your house. They were fiancés. They were planning a life together. And you have don't you have a soul to let the parents know something's going on here? They did nothing. Now they're being sued. Here's part of their response to all of this. Ready? You're sitting down. Here it is. The plaintiffs, meaning, Gabby's parents, have failed to satisfy the elements of causation and severity. The plaintiffs were understandably fearful about what happened to their daughter, and they would have been upset about their daughter regardless of anything the Laundries could have said. But the fear of sadness was not caused. The fear or sadness was not caused by the Laundries. It was an unfortunate, unavoidable part of their entire circumstances surrounding Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito. Can I decipher that for you? What they're saying is, our son murdered your daughter, and there's nothing that we could have said that would have helped you at all. That's their defense. Their defense to this lawsuit is, he murdered her. There's nothing we could do. It's going to make you feel better. Let me bring in my think tank before I get too angry here. Joining us tonight in Seattle, Washington, trial attorney Ann Bremner, and in West Palm Beach, Florida, former police lieutenant and trial attorney Rick King. Good evening. And this is intentional infliction of emotional distress, right, is what they're accusing them of. But it is novel in a sense, and I get it, because they're being sued for their silence. They're being sued for saying nothing, not for doing something. In the first hour of the show, someone was prosecuted for the words that he spoke. Right. Here, we've got a civil suit for remaining silent. What are your initial response just to that big picture, that someone's being sued for saying nothing and for doing nothing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel the same outrage you do, Vinny. It's just, especially to say, well, you would have felt that bad anyway, even if we had not, withheld this information. But on the other hand, yeah, they had a right to remain silent. They had a lawyer, and we don't even know, whether or not these folks knew about what happened with their son and with Gabby, or whether they harbored him. We don't exactly know those facts, truly, based upon what we know for a motion to dismiss. And finally, on intentional infliction of emotional distress, as we know, that's a really high standard, and it's an intentional tort. So the silence part, it's a moral outrage, but is it a legal outrage, what they did? That's the question in the motion to dismiss.
Yeah. Rick King, I know in my heart what Gabby's parents want. They want the Laundries to sit and answer some questions.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's all they wanted from the beginning, really. But now, I mean, this is not going to be settled. This isn't one of those, hey, we'll give you this. No. This one, they want them sit down. They want them deposed. Then they want to put them up on the stand in the trial. It's a civil case, so they can, if this case survives these motions made by the Laundries, they're going to have to answer some questions, Rick.
Right. The Gabby's parents want them to sit and exactly answer those questions, find out what they knew, when they knew, and why they didn't come forward. But unfortunately, I agree with Ann in the sense that, they hired an attorney, and a learned counseled attorney is going to tell you that, hey, let's remain silent in this case, and that's the best thing that we can do here, regardless of what they knew or didn't know. And I don't know that there is a cause of action that, especially for the intentional infliction of emotional distress, that makes it outrageous, which is the standard. It has to be outrageous conduct. And I don't know that you can fashion outrageous conduct in the not speaking.
Okay, let's
not saying anything.
Let's walk through the timeline together, and we'll see some of this conduct, and we'll make a judgment. July 2nd, 2021, Brian Laundrie, Gabby Petito begin their road trip out west. August 12th, police respond to calls of domestic dispute involving Brian and Gabby in Moab. We've seen those videos. August 27th is believed to be the date when Brian Laundrie murdered Gabby Petito, okay? August 27th. Same date, it's believed that Brian Laundrie sent text messages between his phone and Gabby's phone to hide that she was deceased. August 28th, it is believed Brian Laundrie advised his parents that he had murdered Gabby Petito. On the same day, Christopher and Roberta spoke with attorney Bertolino, okay? And this comes from the lawsuit. So this is from the lawsuit, the timeline. So let's start right there, okay? August 28th, they're calling for an attorney. Why? I mean, they know something. And you brought this up, Ann, right? What did they know? When did they know it? I mean, there's a very good circumstantial case to be made here that on August 28th, if they've got the phone records, that they're calling and hiring a lawyer, that they know something at that point.
Well, I mean, I think in a case like this, I mean, to take their side, is this a motion for summary judgment or motion to dismiss? I mean, at this point in the case, is the judge going to let this thing go forward? And what kind of evidence? Yeah, motion to dismiss. Thanks, Rick. But if it were a motion for summary judgment, then we would see some of these records and more evidence. On a motion to dismiss, you usually don't have evidence. It's a 12B6. But the fact is, what was the content of that conversation? So there's a phone call and they hired a lawyer. Is that inference justifiable to say circumstantially?
I can think of no other inference. I can think of no other inference, right? And Rick, I think it's a logical inference that a jury could make that at this point. So let me ask you, if in fact, and this is jumping ahead, Rick, but if in fact this lawsuit survives and gets to the next level, and we're now subpoenaing people and we're deposing people, and the Laundries are sitting down and they're being asked questions, can they go waive the fifth again? Can they waive the fifth at that point?
Well, I would imagine that they could. They have some criminal liability that would take place if they aided or abetted him in this murder.
Now, here's the follow-up, Rick. Here's the follow-up, Rick. And this is what I'm wondering, because we've seen cases where civil cases go first and they uncover things that lead to criminal prosecutions. Could the fact of them taking the fifth kind of maybe push investigators and prosecutors down in Florida, Rick, to say, hey, maybe we should take a second look at the Laundries and what they knew and when they knew it?
Well, that's the danger, and I think you're absolutely right about that. That's the danger of what's going on right now. We're on that line, that line between civil and criminal, and at some point, if this thing goes forward, there could be questions asked that people don't want to answer, and when you don't want to answer them, you could pique the interest of law enforcement. That could happen. So they're in a very precarious position right now, and I know that they really want this.
Oh, they want it to go away. They don't want to sit down. They don't want to answer anything.
Not at all.
They don't even want to show up. They don't want to come out the front door. They don't even want to come out the front door. And let me show you next in the timeline, because September 1st, Brian Laundrie returns to his parents' home in Gabby's van. Come on. They already called for the lawyer, and now here comes Brian in Gabby's van without Gabby. So sometimes 2 + 2 = 4, doesn't it, in our system of justice?
Yeah, always, Vinny. And your viewers know, and the jury instructions always say, circumstantial evidence is as valid as direct evidence. And in fact, I think in a lot of ways it's a lot better, right? And that's what you have here, what you've been pointing out. And if they take the fifth in a deposition, in a civil case, there can be a negative inference drawn from that. In the civil case, aside from what law enforcement might have a piqued interest, the fact is they do that at their own peril, because there will be a negative inference in the jury instructions to the jury saying you can draw something negative from the fact that they took the fifth in their deposition. And then the other question is, do they have peril? do they have a legitimate right to assert the Fifth Amendment in the deposition? Criminal peril.
Let me read some more of this timeline, because we're going to get to a big one here, Rick. Ready? All right, September 6th and 7th, the Laundrie family goes on vacation in Fort DeSoto Park. I think this was the family saying goodbye to Brian Laundrie, knowing what was going to happen. I think they knew all along he's going to take his own life. He just murdered Gabby. He's got no defense to it. And they all know that, so they all get together to say goodbye. September 10th, Roberta Laundrie blocks Nicole Schmidt on her cell phone. Oh, she keeps calling and bothering me about her daughter, Gabby, so I'm just going to block her. Very nice. Well done, Roberta. This is the one I want to talk about, Rick. September 14th, 2021. Knowing their son had murdered Gabby, the Laundries released this statement through their attorney. It is our understanding that a search has been organized for Miss Petito in or near Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. On behalf of the Laundrie family, it's our hope that the search for Miss Petito is successful and that Miss Petito is reunited with her family. That's kind of intentional. Seems like they're zinging them a little bit there. What do we make of that in light of everything we know now, Rick? That statement.
So I want to back up to the blocking of the phone call first.
Go ahead.
So how about this? Hey, Mr. King, they're calling me. They keep calling me. Should I answer the phone? No. Lawyer, just block them. Block them for now, and then we'll issue a statement. Because that's what a lawyer may have told them to do. And you can't. These people were receiving counsel from a seasoned, well-learned attorney who was guiding them into what they should be doing. And maybe that was his counsel, to block the calls, to avoid the confrontations. That being said, also, he returns in Gabby's van and there's no Gabby. Circumstantially, he might have killed her. Also, they might have had a fight, this fight over the domestic violence thing. She wandered off on her own. He left her and came home. He can't get a hold of her. There's another story. There's another story. And as a criminal defense lawyer, it's and listen, I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not pretending that it seems very, very obvious that, Brian killed her. But as a criminal defense lawyer, you're looking at circumstantial evidence, and you want to hold the government to a higher burden, to a strong burden. They have to prove that beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. And so when just the van coming home, yes, it might seem that way, but it might be something else too. And we can't forget that. We can't forget that we cannot allow circumstantial evidence to become direct evidence. And that's what I think that's what we're looking at when we say he comes home in her van. It's a terrible, terrible thing for her family. and I understand as a parent, I understand. But at the same time, the parents of Brian were being counseled by an attorney, and they have the right not to speak.
And that's going to be the big issue in the courtroom, because they've put it already in the motion papers that they filed, and reading through those, that's their argument, that we have the right to remain silent. But if the judge does find that in those circumstances that right is a reason to dismiss this lawsuit, I guess I get it. But it's so wrong. It is so wrong, parent to parent, human to human. And by the way, the Laundries getting counsel, I understand why Brian needs a lawyer. He murdered somebody. But they're just the parents of a murderer at that point. So I don't think they needed the same level of protection. I think it was all them protecting murderer's son. And that's where I think there's a blurring of these lines. But I get it. I get it. And we'll see it tomorrow.
When you read their letter, they acknowledge that. They acknowledge the overwhelming desire to protect your son.
Yep.
They acknowledge that.
Yep.
All right, folks. Think Tank staying with us. We're going to try to get Michael Sterling hooked up. Has some technical difficulties. We'll try to get there. When we come back, the Oxford school shooter. That case, parents of the victims suing the school now, but they don't want a dime. We'll tell you what they want when we come back.
I was basically in the fetal position, shaking because I was scared. It was very scary, but like I was trying, like we were trying not to panic. We have the doors barricaded, and that made me feel a lot safer.
I'm not sending him back to this school. This is ridiculous. There's too much going on too fast.
It's just crazy because like people always say like it's never going to happen to them, and the fact that it happened to two people that I really care about, like it's just really hard.
Well, just moments later, he took his last breath in the police car, and then we lost Tamir. Home is where the heart is, even if our heart is breaking. And I know mine is broken right now.
So sad for all those students. The Oxford school shooting in Michigan took the lives of 4, impacted so many more. But now the parents filed a new lawsuit. You know, we're still tracking the criminal case against the shooter and the case against his parents. But now you've got a civil lawsuit against the school. Jim Kurtzner from our great affiliate WXYZ in Detroit has more for us tonight.
This lawsuit says the school district failed and continues to fail with safety, and staff needs training with suicidal students, when they can be searched, when they can be removed from school.
We don't want to be here. Putting our children's names in a federal lawsuit is a desperate attempt. It's a desperate attempt to be heard.
The parents say they've been to the school board meetings asking for action. Michigan Attorney General has offered to investigate safety improvements 3 times and has been turned down. The board finally agreed to get an independent third party, but the findings will only go through a school district law firm.
We need answers to be able to fix what went wrong. We are not seeking monetary damages.
The parents say there were many warning signs in the days leading up to the school shooting that were ignored.
In the weeks leading up to that day, our children were told over the loudspeaker in the high school that the threats and rumors were not a concern and the school was safe. During that time, multiple parents kept their children home for fear of safety.
The evidence that has played out in criminal court, Oxford student Ethan Crumbley sent warning signs, including drawing a picture depicting a shooting on the morning of it. He was sent to the office. His parents were called in, but they said they couldn't take him home, too busy with work. He was returned to class and his backpack not checked, likely where he was carrying this handgun his parents bought him as a Christmas present, used in the mass shooting.
We find out all 4 of the people who made the biggest mistakes that day are still employed and getting promoted.
The parents say after the Uvalde, Texas shooting, security changed drastically and only briefly.
And for one day, the students' backpacks were searched and the students were physically patted down. Again, no consistency and no proactivity.
And last month, when students walked out of class, parents were not informed.
The administration knew about it the night before, but they sent no communication until the kids were already on the football field. Meanwhile, some students were left alone in their classrooms, calling home, asking to be picked up immediately.
This lawsuit could take months to get through the courts, but it asks a judge to order action. School starts in 10 weeks. In downtown, Jim Kurtzner, 7 Action News.
All right, joining us now in Atlanta, Georgia by phone, criminal defense attorney, former federal prosecutor, law professor at Texas Southern University, Michael Sterling, and still with us, Ann Bremner and Rick King. Michael, very interested in your thoughts. This is this is an issue that is front and center, but these parents are looking for some action. And in the case of what happened in Oxford, it seems there was a lot of opportunity to intervene here, to do something. And now the parents are saying, listen, do something here. Create some level of safety protocols, change something so our kids are safe. What are your thoughts tonight?
Yeah, Vinny, I mean, I think the one mother that we just heard speak described it as an act of desperation, and I think that's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. I think that these parents are so desperate. Parents across the country, but particularly Oxford, are so desperate for somebody to do something. You know, Oxford was one of 34 school shootings last year in which at least one person was killed or injured. And we're not just talking about mass shootings. We're talking specifically about school shootings. And in this case, they just want some third party to investigate. They want some transparency. They want some accountability. They're not even asking for money in a civil lawsuit. They're asking for action. And so I think what we see is this act of desperation to say something has to change. You know, with these school shootings, there has to be something that changes, whether it's at the district level, the city level, the state level, the federal level. Something has to change. And I think these parents are taking the first step to try to get something done.
And Bremner, it's sad that it's got to come down to parents filing a lawsuit to try to get something done here. But from my perspective, you know, our children go to school, and job number one is safety. Safety is first, right? Then you teach them, but there's no point in teaching them if they're not safe.
Well, right, and the schools are in parents, basically they're acting as parents, we know. They're basically supposed to ensure the safety of children. This case was so predictable, you know, with the drawings and the ballistics and the threats. And they basically say, mom and dad say, we don't have time to take him home. I mean, ever since Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold shot up Columbine, we have seen, as Michael just aptly stated, so many school shootings. We know these are predictable. We know what the signs are. And these parents are doing such a great thing by saying no money, we just want action. We want to make sure this never happens again anywhere. We filed a federal lawsuit with the names of every one of those dead children. And we're going to step in and do the right thing and make sure we've done our part to make sure children are protected, and predictable things that clearly were present in this case where this shooter should have been stopped, that those are heeded and acted upon so children aren't killed.
Rick King, former police lieutenant. From my perspective, there's two different types of threats at schools, right? There's the outside threat, an outsider penetrating the school. From my perspective, schools can handle that. I mean, you can have security at a single point of entry, cameras, all of that. Armed guard, yeah, you can do all that. How about here where we're talking about the inside threat? And the threat comes from an actual student at the school, as opposed compared to someone from the outside. Like in Uvalde, it was someone from the outside who penetrated the school. What if it's an insider, a student? How do we keep students safe under those circumstances?
You know, I would say that the students at Madison, Stoneman Douglas would tell you that we're just as vulnerable from the outside as we are from the inside.
Oh, I know we are, but to me, the solution is a lot more obvious to keeping an outside threat from coming in. But how do we protect these kids from the inside threat that's part of the student body?
You know, Vinnie, without taking this to a place we probably don't want to go, the answer is a larger picture of what we should be doing as maybe as a community or as a state or as a nation, talking about how we control these guns. It's a very, very sad day for those parents, it breaks my heart to think of what they must be going through. But we need to figure out a strategy with which to somehow keep the guns out of the hands of these people who are mentally ill and should not be able to get them. And there's probably, you know, we wait for a certain amount of time that we allow young people to drink alcohol. Maybe that's at the point in time when we should start thinking about increasing the age limit to where they can actually possess a firearm as well. There are things that we can do as a community to help make our kids safer, but we have to want to do it, and we have to come together as a community to get it done. It's a broader question that probably takes a little more than the couple of minutes that I'm afforded to answer the question for you. But there are things that we can do as a community. We have to come together and stop the bickering on different sides of the aisle and come together and make our kids safe. There's got to be some common goal, commonality in that.
Yeah, and I hope there's some common sense, because that teacher who spotted the drawings had the common sense. That teacher saw something, that teacher said something, and then the administrators did not follow through. All right. Think tank staying with us. What was that, Rick?
The police failed too in that.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they were there.
They were there.
Yeah.
They failed too.
And Vinny, there were.
Gotcha. Okay, when we come back, we're going to take you on the docket out to Las Vegas, Nevada. Playboy model accused of murdering her sugar daddy. He was a doctor. That's next. On the docket tonight, the Playboy model murder trial. Ted Rollins has the story.
Renowned psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Burchard had been missing for 3 days when his body was found in the trunk of an abandoned BMW in the desert outside of Las Vegas. Judy Earp, his girlfriend of 17 years, was back at their home in California and sensed the doctor was in trouble.
I told them repeatedly that these are not, the kind of people you want to be associating with.
Judy was worried about this woman, 25-year-old Playboy and Maxim model Kelsey Turner. Judy says Kelsey was extorting money from Dr. Burchard.
About $300,000 that I know about, and possibly more.
Burchard had a history of helping others and engaging with young, attractive girls he met online, like Kelsey. That's according to his friend, who did not want to be identified when he was interviewed by KSBW.
These women were just like an escape for him to have somewhere to go. He told me he met Kelsey on the website and met up with her, and they talked, and they went and had dinner a few times.
Dr. Burchard's friend says the psychiatrist started spending time and money on Kelsey, even renting this condo in Salinas, California for Kelsey and her mother to live along with Kelsey's child. Even after Dr. Burchard stopped paying the rent and Kelsey moved to Vegas, the two did keep in contact. And shortly before the murder, Kelsey reached out to the doctor, according to his friend.
He says, seems that Kelsey's having some trouble with her boyfriend out there in Vegas. He's hitting her, he's abusing her, and she has no money, nowhere to go. And I feel partly responsible for this.
Court documents show that Kelsey Turner was, in fact, reported as the victim in a domestic violence case less than a month before the doctor's murder. Dr. Burchard went to Vegas to see Kelsey, calling his girlfriend Judy only after he had arrived, saying he was spending the weekend and would be back on Monday.
I warned him on Saturday when he was there that, maybe you ought not wait till Monday to come home. Maybe you ought to just come home on the next flight.
After missing his flight and not responding to calls and texts, Judy called Las Vegas police. Dr. Burchard's body was found near Lake Mead, about 25 miles outside Vegas.
The actual incident occurred at a residence in the Las Vegas Valley, and then the body was found out by the lake.
This is the Las Vegas home where Kelsey and her boyfriend John Kennison were living and where investigators believe Dr. Burchard was murdered. Kelsey's roommate, Diana Pena, told a grand jury that Kennison attacked Dr. Burchard with a baseball bat and that after the initial attack, Kelsey insisted that her boyfriend knock him out. Pena also testified that the attack left Kennison covered in blood. According to arrest warrants, police recovered a bag from the Rio Hotel. It's where prosecutors say Turner, Kennison, and Pena fled to after the murder. Inside that bag, investigators found sheets of paper ripped from Dr. Burchard's notebook that contained his banking information and passwords.
Additional information as it comes to light.
Kelsey Turner was arrested in California 3 weeks after police recovered Burchard's body. Her extradition was delayed after it was determined that she was pregnant. She has since given birth to a girl while in custody. Her boyfriend, John Kennison, was arrested a few weeks later in Las Vegas. Both are facing murder charges. Kelsey's roommate, Diana Pena, pleaded guilty to accessory to murder and is expected to testify at their trials.
And the latest development out of Vegas is that Kennison, the boyfriend, took a deal. So now Pena Kennison will be testifying purportedly at the trial of Kelsey Turner. We've got a status check, a trial setting on July 5th. On that date, we should find out when the trial will happen. When we come back, wild scene in Florida. Whole bunch of teenagers break into an $8 million house. And it's like fight night, like not fist fights, but like a boxing match taking place. And now the sheriff has put all these videos online, and he wants all the kids to turn themselves in. We'll talk about it when we come back.
and give Lumi a try today.
Okay, so you're watching these kids, right, inside this house having this wild party, and you're like, wow, somebody's parents are going to be really mad when they get home. That wasn't the situation. Those videos were posted by the Walton County Sheriff down in Florida because they broke into a house. It wasn't like one of the kids threw a party at his parents' mansion. No, they broke into an $8 million house. And then that happened. So the sheriff posted the video, long statement, etc., but basically telling or asking these kids to just turn themselves in now. So I posted it on social media and asked you, if your son or daughter was at that party, would you tell them to turn themselves in? We begin with our 13th juror comment of the day. Comes to us from Samantha, who says, yes, this is a situation where you have to make them take responsibility for their own actions. If you don't, you're just allowing them to think that what they did is okay. You have to teach your kid the difference between right and wrong. This is a lesson they will never forget that they brought upon themselves. Michael Sterling. You know, there could be some criminal liability here. You tell them to turn themselves in?
Well, yeah, of course you do, Vinny. First of all, what I would do to them would be nothing compared to what the police might do. So they'd probably be running to turn themselves in just to get away from me. But I would say I think the right answer is yes. That you have to, even as a criminal defense lawyer, I often tell clients who are not my children that the right thing to do is to go ahead, turn yourself in, and then use the process at hand to potentially raise any possible defenses or to mitigate the damage that would be done. But the last thing you want to be seen as someone who's fleeing from accountability, fleeing from justice, because that only makes things worse for you in the end and compromises a lot of times your ability to get a better outcome for yourself.
Gene, tonight, in all honesty, I would not tell my children to turn themselves in, at least not to the police, maybe to their father and his belt, although nowadays he'd have to then turn himself in. I'd imagine most of these kids had no idea they were doing anything other than going to a big party and drinking underage. And Bremner, what's the best way to handle this situation? Because I think there are about 200 kids that were there.
I think they have to turn themselves in. They may face a lot more wrath at home, but I mean, like the sheriff said, that an open party is illegal, but an open party at someone else's house that's not your house, that's a burglary and a felony. So it's better to turn yourself in soon. Think about it with juveniles or younger people. They'll often turn in each other. And I have to add one more thing. This is in Rick's part of the country. I'm interested to see what he has to say.
Absolutely. Well, here's what Karen is saying tonight, Rick. Turn themselves in? Nope. I dragged them by their ears to the police station the same way my parents would have done to me. Then they'd be working every summer and after school jobs so they could pay back the damages. And let me tell you, in an $8 million house, everything's expensive. Everything is expensive. All right, Rick, your thoughts tonight on how to handle this situation?
I have to agree with Michael. I think that my kids would be running to the police station to get away from me. I'd be chasing them down there. That's where they'd want to be. They wouldn't want to be around me. Ultimately, yeah, you have to, as a former police lieutenant, I have to say we gotta turn them in and let the process do what it does. And but they have to understand accountability and the adherence to law. So I would definitely, I got to turn them in.
Michael, and I think about, how you handle this, and this might be getting a little too deep. Hopefully no one has to deal with this at home. But, if your child is okay and just ended up at the party, you turn them in, you get a nice diversionary program, and they do maybe some community service. They've got to take some classes. They've got to do X, Y, and Z. And they've got to stay out of trouble for a while. How's that, Michael? Is that sound like a fair result here for some of these kids?
Yeah, Vinny. That's exactly what I was thinking. That's part of the reason you actually turn yourself in is to mitigate damages. First of all, you're on video. You know that there's going to be video of you, Snapchat, Instagram, and these officers are going to be diligent about finding and searching out anybody else. They're going to be people who turn on you. So turning yourself in is the best option to get the best possible result, because you get to use that when you're, having plea negotiations, and you can get a pretrial diversion program where ultimately the charges are dismissed, and you still have a chance to have a clean record at the end of it. I don't think anybody's trying to ruin these kids' lives, but they are trying to teach them a lesson about accountability. And so I think that becomes a part of this. How can we do some sort of punishment or mitigate the possible damages here? But if they have to catch you, if no one turns themselves in and have to catch you, and other people are turning themselves in, the kids who fled from law enforcement, so to speak, are going to get the worst of the punishments.
And I'll tell you, I'm watching these kids box, and it reminds me of high school. Not for me, but our school, Friday night fights, we used to have them under the street lights. Not me. I would watch them, but things haven't changed that much. We never did it in an $8 million house. Wow. Michael Sterling, Ann Brebner, Rick King, awesome as always. Great to see you. We'll see you again really, really soon. Don't go anywhere, folks, because when we come back, I have an important picture I need to show you. There's a child in potential danger tonight. We need your help.
At magicspoon.com.
Tomorrow night at 8, the Laundrie family attorney will join us live here on Closing Arguments after tomorrow's hearing. Make sure you join us. Before we go tonight, here's a picture I need to show you. This is Sophia Chiara, just 14 years old, missing out of Portsmouth, Rhode Island since May 27th. If you see Sophia, please pick up the phone, 911, 1-800-THE-LOST, or you can call the Portsmouth Police Department. Phone numbers on the screen. Let's see if we can get her back to safety tonight. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you for watching. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
I felt blood running down my face. And this voice came at me that said, if you scream, I will use this, as he shoved a gun to my face.
He was screaming, it's coming. And I'm like, what? The bathroom mirror right next to me exploded. And then we were flying through the air.
He was holding a knife to my throat and offering me candy. He asked me, am I scaring you, little